One might now be like, well, what is there more to Dionysus than wine and parties? Well, strap yourselves in for quite the ride, as there is much more to the figure of Dionysus than meets the eye. Especially looking at his ancient origins reveals a lot about this deity, which through the associations he has, at the same time reveals a lot about our own human nature. As such, after going through his ancient origins, I will go deeper into Dionysus from a Jungian lens and also bring up relevant Neo-Platonic teachings that shed more light onto this interesting figure. Hello and welcome to this new episode. This is Reyes and welcome to another personal exploration video. When we think about Dionysus in modern culture, we tend to think about him as a party god. We associate him generally with winemaking, vegetation, fertility, parties, madness, ecstasy, and theater, where his wine music and ecstatic dance are connected to his followers, such as the Bacchantes or Maenads. These Maenads were portrayed as inspired by Dionysus into a state of ecstatic frenzy through a combination of dancing and intoxication. Through this, they would free themselves from self-conscious fear and care, and subvert the oppressive restraints of the powerful. In that way, he is often linked to the Bacchanalia, which was a mystery cult in ancient Rome, which had strict privacy, and initiates were bound to secrecy. As such, not much is known of this cult or its rites. However, Greek playwright Euripides, the Bacchaea, shows that it had mystery elements and public elements, which included religious dramas which were performed in public and private rites performed by initiates and priests of Dionysus. The earliest written records of Dionysus worship comes from Mycenaean Greece, dating back to around 1300 BC. In preserved fragments of clay tablets, his name was written as Dionysuo. These clay tablets were associated with offerings of wine. Next to this, other Mycenaean records show the worship of a god named Eleuter, who was the son of Zeus and to whom oxen were sacrificed. The link to both Zeus and oxen, as well as etymological links between the name Eleuter with the name Liber Pater, indicate that this probably was another name for Dionysus. According to the scholar Karoli Karenyi, these clues suggest that even in the 13th century BC, the core religion of Dionysus was in place, as were his important myths, making Dionysus not a foreign deity for Greece, but one already firmly established. This Mycenaean Dionysus being associated with the epithet Pentheus, meaning suffering. as Dionysus was a god who must endure suffering before triumphing over it. Where at Knossos in Minoan Crete, men were also given the name Pentheus, showing a religious connection to Dionysus. Where a Mycenaean variant of Bacchus was thought to have been a divine child, abandoned by his mother and eventually raised by nymphs and goddesses. Whilst Dionysus, as the wine and party god, might be his later manifestation, he, however, has a much earlier form which is especially visible in the Orphic Dionysus, who shares much with the ancient Mycenaean one, who was a death and rebirth deity, connected to the ability to enter and leave the underworld. Before I want to go, however, into this more ancient original Dionysus, I want to first go over the ancient myth connected to this version of Dionysus called Dionysus-Zagreus. Before delving much deeper into the aspects of Dionysus-Zagreus and his various links to other deities as well, and what this means within the larger context of not only Greek but also Proto-Indo-European myth. In the age when the world was still young, a powerful and enigmatic being came into existence. Dionysus-Zagreus, the son of Chthonic Zeus, bore the essence of both the heavens and the underworld. Born through the divine union of Zeus, who took the form of a mighty dragon, and Cora, or Persephone, the goddess linked to Ceres or Demeter, Dionysus-Zagreus embodied the mysteries of life and death. As the firstborn Dionysus, Dionysus-Zagreus carried a weighty destiny upon his divine shoulders. He was fated to achieve universal dominion and usher in an era of boundless joy and happiness. His presence held the promise of a kingdom yet unseen, where all beings would find solace and fulfillment. However, the jealousy and scheming of Hera, the queen of the gods, set in motion a tragic turn of events. The Titans, ancient and powerful beings who predated the Olympians, conspired to end Dionysus-Zagreus' divine existence. Envious of the god's power, they sought to snuff out the light that Dionysus-Zagreus represented. And when Dionysus-Zagreus was born into the world, an ethereal realm hidden from the prying eyes of the Titans was crafted to shield him from harm. The gods knew that his divine radiance would be a beacon that could not go unnoticed by their jealous adversaries. Yet, fate has a way of unraveling even the most carefully laid plans. The Titans, driven by their insatiable hunger for power, uncovered the secret sanctuary and seized Dionysus-Zagreus. With merciless brutality, they tore him asunder, their ravenous mouths devouring his flesh. Only his heart, pulsating with divine essence, remained as a testament to his once majestic form. Witnessing this unspeakable act of savagery, Zeus, the father of Dionysus-Zagreus, acted swiftly to preserve the essence of his fallen child. He took the heart of Dionysus-Zagreus and blended it into a potent elixir. This elixir, carrying the very essence of Dionysus-Zagreus, was then entrusted to Semele, daughter of Harmonia and Cadmus, the king and founder of Thebes. However, Semele, guided by the unseen hand of Hera, beseeched Zeus to approach her in all his divine splendor, longing to experience the pleasure reserved for the divine. in her innocent desire, she unknowingly invited her own demise. Struck by a thunderbolt, she perished, consumed by the immense power of Zeus. Yet, from the ashes of tragedy, a glimmer of hope emerged. The infant Dionysus, a rebirth of Zagreus, was later nurtured by the nymphs. And Zeus, recognizing the fragile state of this divine child, entrusted him to the care of the Coriobantes, the ecstatic dancers and protectors of mysteries. Now, as I said earlier, this Dionysus connected to the Orphic mysteries, and the earlier, more ancient form of this deity is a death and rebirth deity, connected to the ability to enter and leave the underworld. As such, when it comes to this Dionysus-Zagreus, there are some interesting connections going on with this figure. First of all, as Zagreus, he is identified with Hades. The 5th century BC philosopher Heraclitus, for instance, had declared that Hades and Dionysus were not only the very essence of indestructible life, but also are the same god. Where the scholar Carl Kearney highlights this connection within both the Homeric hymn to Demeter, votive marble images, and epithets, which all link Hades to Dionysus. Further, he additionally observes that within the myth of Persephone's abduction, the mourning Demeter declined to consume wine, citing it as a violation of divine law, since it was Dionysus' offering. Which, according to Carl Kearney, could point to the notion that Hades could have been a symbolic representation of Dionysus in the underworld, which is a duality known to those initiated into the Eleusinian and Orphic mysteries. Dionysus then also had the epithet Kratonios, signifying his association with the subterranean realm, where in the Bacchaea, Pentheus, who opposed his worship in the god's origin city of Thebes, saw horns upon Dionysus' head as he started to go mad. This connection between Dionysus and death symbolism we can also see within his rites as well, as the cult of Dionysus was also a cult of the souls. The Bacchantes would feed the dead through blood offerings, where Dionysus would act as a divine communicant between the living and the dead. Discoveries of statues of Dionysus within the Plutonian at Ulysses also provides additional support, as these statues exhibit a remarkable similarity to the statue of Eubuleus, also known as Hades of the flowing dark hair, a youthful representation of the underworld lord. And descriptions of the statue of Eubuleus depict it as radiant yet revealing an enigmatic inner darkness. Ancient depiction often also depict Dionysus holding a cantharus, a wine jar with large handles, and occupying the position where one would typically expect to find Hades. Further, the artist Xenocles portrayed on one side of a vase Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, each with his emblems of power, where on the other side of the vase one can see Dionysus striding forth to meet Persephone, with a wine jar in his hand, against a background of grapes. Persephone being seen as his mother, where Zeus was his father. But where it now becomes very interesting is when it comes to the following. As Rosemary Taylor Perry, in her book The God Who Comes, Dionysian Mysteries, points out that Zeus, like Dionysus, was believed to have an underworld form closely identified with Hades, which in a deeper sense links to Zagreus. Zagreus being linked to the underworld and the realm of the deceased, next to being associated with the mysteries of life and death, where he is portrayed as a chthonic deity, often depicted as a primal and chaotic figure. In that sense, Zeus, Zagreus, so kind of Hades, and Dionysus were all seen being the exact same god, making up one divine tripartite deity. Hades is then also Zeus, the sky god, where the act of taking Kore, so Persephone, by Hades represents the conception and birth of a second integrating force, this being Dionysus-Zagreus, who is then also often called Yahus, but also Yahus being the third Dionysus, where he is known as Lignitis, the helpless infant form of Dionysus, who is the unifier of the chthonic realm of Hades and the Olympian realm of Zeus. Dionysus being in this form connected to the search for and putting together of the dismembered pieces that through the rebirth will form Yahus, who in this final form was seen as being the highest god. And it is in this helpless form as Lignitis that Dionysus is protected and nurtured by the Corybantes and their king. But when it now comes to Zeus, Hades, and Dionysus as a tripartite deity, well, to fully understand this from a Jungian lens, what is going on, we need to place this within the larger context of the succession of the rulership of deities. The first deity to rule the cosmos being Ouranos, in the cosmogony of ancient Greece. He represented the night sky, representing the unconscious mind from a Jungian lens. And he is the first ruler of the cosmos and is associated with the primal untamed forces of nature, where in the three-sky cosmological model, the celestial phenomena linking the nightly and daily sky is embodied by a binder god, the Greek Kronos, a transitional deity between Ouranos and Zeus in Hesiod's theogony. Where finally Deus, the day sky father, who later in Greek tradition became merged with the thunder god as Zeus, represents the active outward-facing aspect of the sky and is associated with daylight and consciousness. Zeus, who as other later thunder gods is connected to the sun, spends the night in the earth, or the cavern of death and rebirth, going past Kronos, the binding god that overthrew Ouranos, representing the night, where the goddess Eos, representing the dawn, symbolizes the rise of consciousness. Finally, Deus, the day sky father, as the sun rising into the heavens, represents consciousness itself, rising from the grasp and sleep of the unconscious, which is also often symbolized as the wrestling with the serpent. As such, Zeus ends up overcoming the twilight of Kronos. Yet when it now comes to Kronos, he is then also tied to serpentine symbolism, pointing towards his original nature as an uninhibited libido figure, representing power and fertility, where with the establishment of civilization and societal order, he became associated with law, order, and social taboos, becoming a sort of paradox, making the figure as a symbol of source of libido into a figure that becomes the source of its restriction. As such, Kronos' restriction of the primal forces of Ouranos signifies the ego's attempt to regulate and control instinctual drives. And in the best case scenario, Kronos represents discipline and meticulous control. However, in the worst case scenario, Kronos becomes the negative animus of the terrible mother, which can become tyrannical, and thus in Greek mythology was overcome by Zeus, so Jupiter. And he set up a different relationship between society and the individual, more based on justice and a focus on cultivating an internal morality in people than enforcing morality from the outside, whilst the thunder god also connects to a more self-controlled form of libido expression, which is not self-denying or tyrannical, but more about the process of learning how to deal with one's impulses through discipline whilst letting it flow in a conscious manner, which means acknowledging the impulses and giving them conscious expression, which allows for more creativity as well. We can see this symbolically also through Rhea, who is associated with the idea of raw flowing libido, and Kronos in his tyrannical restriction having Zeus as their son, who unites flow and discipline in a conscious manner, and his overthrow of Kronos thus symbolizes the ego's liberation from the constraints of unconsciousness and its assertion of autonomy and moral agency. Where in the Orphic tradition, Dionysus-Zagreus is the successor to Zeus, and he combines both the celestial nature of Zeus, associated with discipline, and the consciousness, self-controlled form of libido expression, with the revitalizing, regenerative, transformational, and vital energies from the earthly and chthonic realm associated with the sovereignty goddess. However, the significance of Dionysus-Zagreus goes even deeper. Looking at the Proto-Indo-European pantheon and the connections to it. Within the Dionysian rites, his rituals connected to the sacred bull reenacted the creation of the cosmos and humanity by offering a bull as a sacrificial symbol, and this act was in its mysteries seen as a divine dismemberment of the god himself, echoing the dismemberment of Yemo. Yemo being the Proto-Indo-European figure who was dismembered to create the cosmos and social order, where Dionysus' flesh and blood, symbolized through the sacrificial meal of a bull and wine, when consumed by his worshippers, symbolized the god infusing his presence into his followers' bodies, imparting a portion of his divinity. We can see here a connection between Dionysus-Zagreus and Yemo, who in other myths takes the form of a cow or is sacrificed together with a cow. Yemo being connected to the underworld, overseeing the dead, and connected to bovines. Next to Dionysus-Zagreus, as much as Yemo being linked to kingship, as Dionysus-Zagreus in myth was meant to take over from his father, the thunder god, yet died and was dismembered. His kingdom was within the Orphic mysteries called the Kingdom of Happiness, yet the connection within the Orphic tradition regarding Dionysus-Zagreus and creation can not only be found within ritual. In the Orphic tradition, the Orphic egg, cosmic egg, was the birthplace from which emerged the primordial hermaphroditic deity Phanes, which they also identified with Eros and Dionysus-Zagreus. Phanes being connected to the creation of the cosmos, with Phanes as protogonos, meaning firstborn, having been linked to Prayapati by scholars, who was both connected to Brahman as much to Purusha. Purusha being this cosmic giant who, dismembered by the gods, created the universe. And Hinduism refers to him as the soul of the universe, the universal spirit present everywhere, in everything and everyone, all the time. And during the Vedic period, Purusha was considered the ultimate sacrificial victim, whose sacrifice was the act of creation, which also has been linked to Yama, and with it regarding both to Yemu from the Proto-Indo-European myth. And this link to Yemo, who is both connected to sacrifice and kingship from a Proto-Indo-European lens, is because the king was seen as both at the center of society and outside of its social order, as such being the figure who would be sacrificed as scapegoat if the social order would fail. And we can also see this with Dionysus as well. Dionysus as a deity also being this outcast deity, who at the same time was originally meant to be the king of the gods after his father Zeus. As Zagreus, where he is dismembered, he is the scapegoat underworld twin, equated with powers of death, wasteland, drought, darkness, winter, and the underworld, where the reborn Dionysus, as divine child, savior, and new king, is connected to the powers of prosperity, life, health, joy, the fertilizing waters, the renewed sun, and renewed rulership. And this connection regarding Dionysus and the Savior, and very much the Redeemer, is also visible in one Orphic hymn. And this hymn says, "I call upon you, blessed and wildly named Bacchus, the bull-horned Redeemer of Nysa, god of the winepress conceived in fire." As such, Dionysus-Zagreus combines both scapegoat and Redeemer into one figure, being not just a figure of death and the underworld, but one that has the ability to be reborn like the sun is reborn every morning, being Neo-Platonic in nature, uniting the celestial and earthly realms, consciousness and unconscious. And this idea linked to Dionysus has been further elaborated and developed by the Neo-Platonic philosophers. Neo-Platonism being a philosophical system which was developed by Plotinus and later elaborated by thinkers like Proclus and Iamblichus and Olympiodorus. From a Neo-Platonic perspective, the identification of Dionysus with Hades we talked about way earlier within the video symbolizes the descent of the soul into the material realm in its subsequent ascent to the divine. Hades, as the ruler of the underworld, represents this realm of material existence and spiritual darkness. And according to Neo-Platonism, the soul originates from the higher realms of the nous, or the world soul, but descends into the material realm, becoming entangled in the cycle of birth and death. And this descent is often symbolized as a journey into the underworld, where the soul becomes immersed in the realm of matter and forgets its divine origins. Olympiodorus, the Neo-Platonic philosopher, also noted this kind of symbolism regarding the Thyrsus as well, which is connected to Dionysian worship. And he noted that it symbolizes the forming anew of the material and separated substance from its scattered condition, whilst also symbolizing the diffusion of the higher consciousness into the material world. So it in that sense represents both the state of dissolution and integration at the same time. The Thyrsus as a symbol being represented by a pine cone. Olympiodorus further stated, "At the start, our irrational side is like the Titans, destroying our rational and higher self. When we neglect our intuitive intellect, which is hidden within us and connects us to both the lower and higher aspects of ourselves, we become like the Titans, or traitors to ourselves. But when we align ourselves with this intuitive aspect, we become like Bacchus, in control and in harmony with our irrational side. And this idea of the soul's nature being a combination of its connection to the eternal world and divinity reflects the concept of the dual nature of the human psyche and Jungian psychology. The Titans here symbolize the destructive and irrational aspects of the psyche, while Bacchus represents the harmonious integration of the irrational and the rational parts of the self. So really, a coming together of the more intellectual, intuitive, spiritual, and instinctual parts of our being into a singular whole that can coexist in harmony with each other. As such, the reintegration of the scattered parts of Zagreus and the rebirth of Dionysus as Yahus represents the process of individuation. So really, the dismemberment of the Jungian self by the social order and the repression of the shadow, where his hero journey into the underworld and the reclaiming of the scattered parts represents the reintegration of the shadow, the unconscious repressed contents we are often too uncomfortable to face or admit, where his rebirth as Yahus and ascent to Mount Olympus represents the attaining of wholeness. And we can see this further during his ascent, where the reborn Dionysus encountered Ariadne, the forsaken princess of Crete left behind by Theseus on the island of Naxos. The two embarking on a joyous journey together, with Dionysus transforming the deserted island of Naxos into a lush paradise for his beloved Ariadne, where they enjoyed a blissful union, surrounded by the celebrations and festivities that were typical of Dionysus' divine realm. And in some versions of the myth, Dionysus rewarded Ariadne's unwavering love and devotion by placing her among the stars, immortalizing her as the constellation Corona Borealis, the northern crown, in the night sky, where with Ariadne, Dionysus ascended to the lofty heights of Olympus, where the gods and goddesses of the pantheon resided. And from a Jungian lens, this represents the integration of the anima and animus, the symbolic masculine and feminine aspects of the psyche. The anima being linked to emotional depth, intuition, and sensitivity, where the animus is linked to setting goals, making decisions, taking action, power, and assertiveness. As such, the animus can give a person the confidence and strength to stand up for themselves and assert their own needs and desires. Though, in a deeper sense, both are related to the way we relate to ourselves, others, and the world. And this process of integration is a key step in the journey towards wholeness and individuation. In the Orphic tradition, those who atoned for the murder by the Titans were given the title Children of the Moon or Child of the Moon, a title connected to Persephone, whereas Yahus, in his third form in the Orphic hymns, is described as the torchbearer who leads the way out of the underworld, but also as the firstborn Dionysus who emerged from the ashes of the dismembered Zagreus. As such, from a Jungian perspective, he represents the transcendent function, which plays the role of an autonomous regulator, which emerges and gradually begins to work as the process of individuation begins to unfold, being the third emerging from the struggle of the two, which is also the goal within the Neo-Platonic tradition, for the soul to ascend back to its divine origin, to reunite with the One, where this integration of opposites is also central to the Neo-Platonic quest for unity and wholeness, wherein the soul transcends dualistic categories and realizes its essential oneness with the divine. This sense of descent and ascent being symbolic and metaphorical in nature, representing different states of being instead of a literal ascent to another sphere of being. It is the coming together of various opposites, such as masculine and feminine, intellect and instinct, reason and emotions, spiritual and earthly, which is represented with this ascent, which for the Jungians represents the self, the center of the psyche and the personality, which represents the authentic self, and with it wholeness and the one. And in that sense, the entire process of individuation or becoming who we are also is present in the myth of Dionysus-Zagreus. From his dismemberment, the birth of the divine child, the bringing together of the scattered parts, and finally the birth of the hero who faces and integrates the shadow. Finally, with that, moving closer to the self. But when we now bring it all the way back from ancient Greece and Rome, all the way back to modernity, Dionysus also still as a figure plays an important role not only for Nietzsche, but also for Carl Jung. Because Dionysus, next to being connected to Nietzsche and his descent into madness, is also further connected to, like I said, Carl Jung. So why Dionysus links to Carl Jung is due to a childhood dream. And in this childhood dream, Jung, alone at night, descends stone steps and enters an underground throne room in an open grassy field through a shimmering, heavy curtain of green and gold. And at the end of the darkened room, he sees an awesome unknown form on a throne, illuminated by light from within. In terror and awe, he realizes the shape is a huge upright living phallus. And suddenly his mother is there at Jung's side and cries out to the boy in contempt and dire warning. Yes, just look at him, the man-eater. Which prompted Jung to wake up terrified. Jung, however, as the Jungian analyst Michael Cornwell pointed out, never acknowledged that the deity of his childhood dream that captured him for most of his life was a vision of Dionysus. Even Jungian writer Lopez Pedraza, in his book Dionysus in Exile, The Repression of the Body and Emotion, further highlights the importance of Dionysus to psychology as the singular deity who both brings and heals madness. However, Dionysus still largely remains in exile. And we can see the Dionysian influence regarding Jung further after his break with Freud, where Jung describes a long period of psychological disturbance and a visionary experience that he described as a room full of disembodied spirits of the dead, who descended on him crying out, "We have been to Jerusalem where we found not what we sought," which echoes Dionysus' role as communicant of the dead in his links to the realm of the underworld and death and rebirth. And as the Jungian analyst Michael Cornwell again pointed out, although Jung's work has been immeasurable, it can also be said that those who went to Zurich actually or symbolically found not what they sought, because Jung disguised his Dionysian soul in Christian clothing, which stripped it of its deeper potency. As such, a final question can be asked. Do we as society or individuals slip back into unconsciousness through succumbing to the negative side of Kronos, or do we move forward toward the Dionysian? But in the end, when it comes to Dionysus and his deeper connections, we can surely see his relevance to Jungian individuation, next to reconnecting us back to both the instinctual realms of our being, the unconscious, our emotions, the body, but also with the higher spiritual spheres of existence. Being connected to Yemo through Zagreus, Dionysus as a deity very much and also represents more than just a wild party god connected to wine and revelry. In its deepest sense, it represents the unification of the unconscious and consciousness and the establishment of the kingdom of happiness within. And speaking here from my own personal experience working with Dionysus and the sovereignty goddess through the shamanic and ecstatic choreos practice, it is through such a practice, much like the Corybantes, that we can nurture the self and bring back together the fragmented aspects of ourselves, to be in a direct communion and connection to the gods. To have, through sacred shamanic trance, direct encounters with chthonic archetypes and deities, and find our path towards an embodied experience where the soul is embodied in our experience of life, without being entangled in projection, or as the Orphic priest would call, the titanic projection into matter, which binds us into suffering.
Πολυσυφρονιαίος όταν φρένασες άμμας εσέλθει με δίδοντας διδάσκει με χορεύει